Welcome to the Hockey Podcast. I am Luke Lipinski.
And I'm Doug Cannon.
On this week's show, we preview the Atlantic, why Florida is guaranteed a top 8 finish in the division, Detroit's magical journey to the East, and what makes Jonathan Drouin the Ashton Kutcher of the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Who will finish first in the Atlantic Division, and who will finish last? Both Luke and I take a look, give our prediction. I'm right, he's wrong.
That's false. All that and more, let's drop the puck on episode 16. All right, here we go. Episode 16, previewing the Atlantic Division. If you missed it last week, we did the Central Division alongside Doug Cannon, Luke Lipinski here. The way we're going to do this, like we did last week, burning questions for each team. We're not going to sit here and go through the entire roster, any of that stuff. It's not a statistics-based show. Doug's already asleep, and I haven't even mentioned a statistic yet. So we're going to come up, we each came up with at least one, maybe a couple for some of these teams. Toronto's in here. I've got a few for you that I demand answers on.
Oh, come on.
But some questions on each team, an 8-team division. There's a lot of teams from the former Southeast in here, which is, to me, the main storyline going in. How do these Southeast teams acclimate to playing against, a newcomer like Detroit? And maybe more than anything else, the coaching discrepancy in this division. You've got Paul McLean, who won the Jack Adams last year. Claude Julien won it in 2009 for Boston. Mike Babcock's never won it, but he's always right up there in the running for it. And then you have other teams that have guys like John Cooper and Ron Rolston and even Kevin Dineen entering his third year. Some unproven coaches, too. So I don't know. I want to see how that plays out. I can tell by your your stunned silence that you are equally as excited about that. So let's just start.
Well, no, yeah. Just the coaching.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah, it's 50-50, though. I mean, but the 50...
This feels like a math problem.
No, but the 50 that are at the bottom of this conference, and we're in the bottom of the Southeast, and we're basically at the bottom of the Eastern Conference last year, are your unproven coaches.
Well, yeah. And
the seasoned coaches are definitely going to control the top half of this division. There's no question.
There's some Stanley Cup contenders in this division, too. And I think
absolutely,
starting with Boston, certainly they made it to the Stanley Cup last year. It looked, after what was a Game 3, like they might actually win the Stanley Cup, and then
I thought they were going to win the Stanley Cup. I really, really did. I thought they were going to take it away from Chicago. Proven wrong again, but I'm okay with that. I really thought they were going to take it.
Yeah, well, and then even Game 6, if you recall, they looked like they at least had that game won and just a complete meltdown in the final minute and a half against Chicago for the Blackhawks to win the Stanley Cup, although the Bruins, great comeback against Toronto in round 1.
Well, that was the thing, when they came to the final, you couldn't rule them out. Okay, they'd faced adversity early in the playoffs. When they got to the final, I went, I can't rule this team out. This team is too good. And with that in mind, my question for this team is, can they do it again?
Well, I think they certainly can. They're certainly capable of it. We talked about this last week with Chicago, and even last year with L.A., there's not as much of a grind last year. It was a shortened season.
But that's where I'm going. My burning question here is, can they do it again? Rask can't do 82 games.
No, he can't. That's a fair point.
So, Chad Johnson's his backup?
Chad Johnson hasn't played a whole lot of NHL games, but when he has, he's looked solid.
He's looked solid. I like him as a young player. But going into an 82-game NHL season, my question for this team, though, is a lot of weight is going to be looking between the pipes.
Yeah. Well, this is just like Chicago last week. The expectations are so much higher. So, again, look at this team. Yeah, they're definitely a playoff team. They're going to be a tough team to beat in the playoffs. The main pieces are still there. Patrice Bergeron is there. Zdeno Chara is there. But to win the Stanley Cup or get back, they're going to need an encore performance from Tuukka Rask. Look, he basically shut out the Penguins in the Eastern Conference Finals last year.
Yeah, no, I agree. But they lost Jágr.
But they got Iginla. And everybody loses Jágr every year.
Yeah, that's true.
3 teams lose Jágr each season.
That's a good point that they did pick up Iginla. That is truly a good point. My still, though, is how many games do you think Rask is good for out of 82?
Well, I think Boston fell into a pretty good situation here. Not by accident. I mean, obviously they took Tuukka Rask, but for Tim Thomas to do his random "I'm going to go live in a cave in Colorado" thing last year, that was Rask's first full season, but he didn't have to play 82 games because it was a shortened season. I think he's good for 65 games this year.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is, but I think they're going to ride him. I mean, it's going to be like Henrik Lundqvist in New York.
Okay, a good comparison. So 65 games. It's a lot of games, man. The only thing I can say that is going to help is that this team has a solid blue line. The core of this team is still intact. And that's what got them to the final last year. It was that they kept their core players. They still have their core players. I like the blue line on this team. Strong blue line. They're going to help their goalie. But boy, oh boy, and that's a lot. It's a lot of games.
Yeah, well, and they bring in some guys, but you lose Tyler Seguin.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this was your number one.
He had a horrible playoff.
He did, but he's
a good
still
player.
A very young player. They lose Rich Peverly, Andrew Ferentz, Nathan Horton is the big one. Anton Khudobin, the backup goalie last season. But Horton's probably the big one. They get Louis Eriksson from Dallas for all those players, and they get Jerome McGinley. But as you just said, the core is still intact. And the reason, this leads into my question, are they going to have that Stanley Cup hangover? Everybody talks about the team that won the Stanley Cup, but it's usually the team that gets there and loses that really has a hard time the next year. But the reasons I don't think they're going to have it are, A, last year was a shortened season, so they're not all beat up necessarily. And B, it's essentially the same core that won the Stanley Cup in 2011, which wasn't that long ago.
Right. And that's their saving grace as far as I'm concerned. And now on top of that, they have one of the veteran coaches. They got Claude Julien. So they got somebody on the bench that's going to keep things hopefully steered in the right direction.
Yeah, he knows what he's doing. He's one of the best coaches in the game, and I love the public outcry from fans when it looked like they were going to lose in round one this past year that he might need to go. Really?
That's why we love our fans.
So 29 coaches need to be fired every season. So that's Boston. You have anything else to say about them? Where are you putting the Bruins in this division?
Ooh, we're going to do that now?
And we can do it at the end.
Yeah, let's do it at the end. Don't throw me in the fire that quick.
Well,
Holy cow.
That's why I did it. I'll just give a sample. I think the Bruins finish second in this division. And I won't do any more till the very end.
Wow. Okay.
I do think they finish second.
So moving along alphabetically in the Atlantic Division.
Not behind this team. Go ahead.
We stumble across Buffalo.
Stumble's a good word.
They finished 23rd in the league last year and 12th in the Eastern Conference.
What happened to the Buffalo Sabres?
I don't know. I really don't know.
They get new ownership a couple years ago. There's all this excitement. They pour a ton of money into their new roster, and now they've really trimmed quite a bit of it off, actually. They're one of the lower payrolls in the NHL. This has them 27th in the NHL as far as cap space available. So,
well, here's the question. This is a good roster, man. This is not a bad roster.
The question is, what roster are you looking at?
Well, I mean, you got Thomas Vanek.
Okay.
You got Hodgson.
Okay. I do like Hodgson. Quite a bit, actually.
You got Ennis.
Okay.
You got Ott.
Yeah. I don't know if this is a good roster, though. You just named their best players, other than Ryan Miller and goal.
Okay, but
I don't know. Tyler Myers, they signed him that huge deal, and
12.
Not the same.
12 of the top guys are all in double digits when it comes to points.
All right.
That's spread out pretty good. Your top three guys are the three guys I mentioned, Hodgson, Vanek, and Ennis.
And Hodgson's on the way up.
Right. I mean, so I don't think...
I don't like this team at all.
I don't dislike them. I don't have a problem with this team whatsoever, other than when we get to... My two things are coaching and goaltending.
Well, I mean, they should have one of the best goaltenders in the NHL.
Should, but where's he been lately?
Well, the bigger question, leads to my question, where is he going?
Okay.
He's an unrestricted free agent at the end of this year. Thomas Vanek is an unrestricted. If this is a full-blown rebuild, which if you get rid of Vanek and Ryan Miller, it is.
Right.
So I think the first half of the season is going to be so telling for the Sabres, not just for this year, obviously, but for the next 3 or 4 years, because if they are struggling the way they did last year, and you read off the numbers, they weren't.
But if you get rid of Ryan Miller, you're only left with Onrath.
No. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, I mean, you're completely starting over.
With a 2.6 goals against.
But Ryan Miller last year was what, 2.8?
Yeah.
1. I mean, that I don't know what happened to Ryan Miller. Here's the thing with Buffalo. If Ryan Miller goes out there and he plays like the guy that took the U.S. to the silver medal 4 years ago, and the guy that guided Buffalo and won the Vezina Trophy a few years back too, then this team can contend. But if he goes out there and he struggles early on, I mean, there's been so many rumored problems in the locker room that he doesn't have a good attitude anymore. You don't know if any of that's true. But if Buffalo gets in a situation where they decide we have to trade Ryan Miller and Thomas Vanek, it's going to be a couple years of this.
Well, hopefully it's not. I mean, I kind of like I said, I like this team. I don't think this roster is as bad as you may think it is. The question that I have with these guys, though, is you've got Ron Rolston as the head coach. He's had success. I mean, he took the U.S. national U17 team, and they lost. They didn't make the playoffs. I correct myself. They didn't make the playoffs.
Okay.
But his last 2 seasons in the AHL with the Rochester Americans, they lost in the first round. So he knows on the minor league level how to win. He's got to be able to translate that to the NHL level and get these guys and get them going. Get these guys going.
He's in a tough spot, though, because if they do what we just said they might do and they end up trading guys, then he's not really in a great position to succeed.
No, he's not. Only if he's included in the decision-making process. If he has a little bit of say of, okay, if I'm going to lose this player, who are we going to get? And if you're going to look this way, can we look that way?
And they have to have patience. If you're Buffalo and
absolutely.
you're rebuilding and you have a new coach and you give him a year, I mean, if we get a Dallas situation where they just keep letting their coach go every year and a half, Buffalo could be. I don't think they will.
Buffalo fans will.
Yeah, Buffalo's a great hockey city.
Yeah, Buffalo fans won't stay quiet if that happens.
It's true. I want to see Mikhail Grigorenko. I would assume he's going to play quite a bit this year. A big center, which is everything this team has needed because they had a lot of really short guys there for a while. I mean, Tyler Ennis is still small. Nathan Gerby's gone.
Here's one thing they do have to fix, okay?
Okay.
Point leader on the team.
And what had to be Vanek last year, wasn't it?
Goal leader on the team.
That was definitely Thomas Vanek because he started off on
assist leader on the team.
Yeah, well.
Can we have a few more guys in here?
And his name keeps getting thrown around in trade rumors.
Well, I mean, he does have value. It depends on what you get for him.
I really like Cody Hodgson. I think if we were adding this feature in of a player to watch that could break out on each team, which in retrospect maybe we should have done, but we're not, so take that. Cody Hodgson would be that guy because I love that trade for Buffalo where they trade Zach Kassian to Vancouver, who is clearly just panicking, and we need a guy that's kind of like Milan Lucic, and I think they give up a really good player in Cody Hodgson.
Yes.
And he had 34 points last year for Buffalo in 48 games, so he's going the right way.
And then we go to our favorite city. So glad they're out of the Western Conference.
Everybody's favorite city. The Detroit Red Wings.
They're bankrupt, you know.
Well, they don't play like they're bankrupt. Moving over to the Eastern Conference. I don't remember who brought this point up to me. It was a great point, so I'm just going to say I brought up this point.
Okay.
They have rivals in both conferences.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one team you could move from the Western Conference. Because you move a team, you're like, okay, we're breaking up all these rivalries. Okay, we'll just move them over to the East. They have rivalries with Pittsburgh and Toronto and everybody over in the East, too. The Red Wings are sneaky good. They were sneaky good last year. They haven't missed the playoffs since 1990. The only real question for me with this team is how long does it take to make the transition over to the Eastern Conference, because it is a different style of hockey. I'm not saying one's better or one's worse, but it's different. It's a different game.
That was my question too. Is moving into a new conference, you will be facing some teams you haven't played for in a long time. You know, the new alignment, the new rules and everything are going to slowly change that over the years, you know, playing all East opposing conference teams, at least at home once and away once. So over the next 3 or 5 years, I don't think this would be as big a question as it is now.
Just this first year.
Because, I mean, you know, they're so used to playing Anaheim, Phoenix, Dallas, you know. But now they've got to play, and it is a different brand of hockey.
Well, and here's the question then. Is this team a legitimate Stanley Cup contender?
I unfortunately would have to say that the Detroit Red Wings are always a Stanley Cup contender. Their roster is not weak in any way, shape, or form.
It isn't. I don't know why people got on this sort of train where they're like, well, Nicholas Lidstrom retired, so this
Big
team,
deal.
they're a decent team. I mean, and I get that it is a big deal, and their defense is much weaker. Nicholas Kronwall is probably your best defenseman, but Jimmy Howard's better, and I don't really care who else you have. If you have Pavel Datsyuk and Henrik Zetterberg, you have a chance to win.
Yeah, and as I've approached this, I'm trying not to, because it does play a little bit, but last year was only a 48-game season. So I don't want to put a lot of weight into 48 games. I do put in weight, like I said with Rask, playing a 48-game season and playing an 82-game season. There's a big difference there, game-wise. But, I mean, this is a good team, man. And I think that 48-game season probably helped other teams and didn't help some teams.
That's true.
But Detroit always finds a way to get there. And then, you and I spoke earlier on before the playoffs or as the playoffs were starting. We were questioning if the Red Wings were even going to make the playoffs.
And not only do they make the playoffs, they take out Anaheim in the first round.
Mm-hmm.
They lead Chicago 3-1 and obviously couldn't hold on. But
right.
It's always a team you don't want to play. That's the thing about the Red Wings. You say what you want about Mike Babcock just in general, but he's a very good coach. And look, all that offensive firepower, I know you gave me your speech about how it was a 48-game season, so you don't want to put too much stock into the stats, but in 42 games last year, Jimmy Howard, 21 wins, 13 losses, 7 overtime losses, but a 2.13 goals against average, which to me is the biggest stat of all for any goalie, is the goals against average.
Right.
And he doesn't even have to be that good for them to be successful. He just has to be decent.
Yeah, but I think Jimmy Howard's better than just decent. I just think this team, the thing that the Red Wings have to do is they got to find, and because they have Mike Babcock as their bench boss, he will find them a way to adjust to the Eastern Conference play.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of veterans on this team, and they know, and they will adapt, and they got Mr. Alfredson now.
Which will be an interesting storyline because Ottawa is in this division.
Right.
So it's not just like, I left you guys and I'm going over to the West and I'll see you once this year. I'm going to see you repeatedly over and over again and probably make life pretty difficult on Ottawa when he plays against them.
Oh, I don't disagree.
And Stephen Weiss from Florida, who is quietly a very consistent player. I mean, you look at Detroit's top two lines. It's Datsyuk, Zetterberg, and Abdelkader on that first line. Mm-hmm. And then it's Alfredson, Weiss, and Franzen on the second line. I mean, that's
what I'm saying.
Yeah,
it's a good team.
They're going to run you over with those two lines. So that's the Red Wings. There's nothing new and surprising there, but that's
plus
a
Stephen Weiss is from Toronto.
Okay, well, maybe that drops them a little bit. Florida Panthers. Can we just make the biggest transition from a good team to the Florida Panthers in podcast history?
Well, unfortunately, poor Florida finished 30th in the league and 15th in the conference. They got nowhere to go but up.
Yeah, but I mean, this team the year before was a playoff team. They were in the playoff. They won the division. Again, Southeast Division.
I can't give you an answer as to what happened. Again, did the 48-game schedule hurt them?
No, it didn't.
No, it didn't.
It prevented them from losing 60 games. I don't know what to make of Florida because Kevin Dineen in his first year as coach was fantastic. Mm-hmm. Last year really struggled. I don't know how much that you can pin on him, though, because I think they overachieved in his first season. I think that's
possible.
The best way to say it. And they had a lot of players that they were able to pick up. You remember they had to spend money just to get to the salary cap floor, so they had to go out and buy a bunch of one-year players and two-year players. And they had all those vets, put it all together that first year. I don't know what they're doing now. They do have a lot of young talent. The question for me is, are they going to be patient enough to develop it? Because now you've got Huberdeau played last year, won Rookie of the Year. You've got Alexander Barkov. You got quite a few good, talented young players, but if they are given too much responsibility early, you could burn them out.
Yep, and you goaltending's I always keep my eye on that goaltender, man. I mean, when you're letting in almost 4 goals a game,
well, yeah, you're not.
And you don't have any firepower to answer that. It's not like a Tampa Bay, where if you score 6 on them, they'll score 8.
Yeah, they don't care.
They don't care, right? But Florida doesn't have that firepower.
Well, the goaltending with Florida, so Jose Theodore is currently an unrestricted free agent. I'm guessing he's not coming back. Jacob Markstrom is clearly the goalie of the future.
Correct.
Is that now or is that down the line? Because if it's not right now, then Scott Clemenson is your goalie of the present, and that makes me think you're probably not going to see a huge improvement. But I want to know if they bring in Tim Thomas. This is the team I really think Tim Thomas should end up on.
Well, I want to see if they bring Peter Mueller back.
Well, they got Scott Gomez. Talked about him a little bit last week.
We talked about him last week, and I think Scotty Gomez is a good fit, but he's got to have somebody that he can dish to. Yeah, and we talked about it last week. Huberdeau is really going to benefit.
Yeah.
If he gets a chance to play with him. I mean, I don't know where Gomez is going to end up on the depth chart, but
look at this team. He's probably going to be fairly high.
Yeah, well, only because he's got experience and he's a consistent scorer, and they need that. And we talked about it last week. He dishes off, so we'll see. We'll see where it ends up.
All right, let's play a little quick quiz here. Who led the Florida Panthers in total points last year? Don't look at your computer. You already looked, didn't you?
I already looked.
You still don't have an answer, even when you're looking at it, because you're in shock. Thomas Fleischmann, 35 points in 48 games. He's a solid player. We talked about Huberdeau. I mean, the sky's the limit with that guy. Chris Versteeg was hurt a lot last year, and that Chris Versteeg missed 38 games last year. The year before, he was maybe their best player. So they can be better, but they lost Stephen Weiss. I don't know how much responsibility you can really put on Scott Gomez's shoulders. So this could be another long year for the Panthers.
We always talk free agency. Mueller's not coming back or hasn't been signed. We don't know if he's coming back to Florida or somebody else is going to pick him up. And then you have the first round draft pick in Barkov. I mean, are they going to put a lot of weight on this kid, or are they going to groom him before they put him to the roster?
I don't know if he can walk in. I mean, yeah, whether he can walk in and play or not, I think they're going to have to put him in. I want to see him play.
Sure.
But that's because I don't really care what happens to the Panthers one way or the other.
Bottom line, at the end of the day, this team's got a lot of work.
Yeah. You're tuned into the Hockey Podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Hockey Podcast for even more hockey news.
#do it.
2013-14 division preview rolling right along. Looking at the new look Atlantic Division this week. Next week, the Metro. Sound good?
Yeah. No, it doesn't sound good. It doesn't, okay? But I'm still – I had this conversation with my 16-year-old son, and we were talking about the division, and we made more jokes about the name of the division than we did about discussing teams within the division. And I'm like, this isn't going to change.
Nah, how long do you think it takes? 20 years? 25 years?
I don't know, man. I can't get my head around where you have either a region or a time zone, and then the metropolitan.
It bothers everybody except me. It just doesn't bother me. As I said,
different.
As I said way back when they put these divisions out, but they didn't have names. As long as you don't name them after Kardashians, I'm fine with however you want to name them. Metro is going down that path a little bit.
It's pretty close, yeah.
Anyway, back to the Atlantic, which is where we are now. On to the Montreal Canadiens. Finished last season as the number 2 seed in the Eastern Conference.
4th in the league.
Okay, well, here's my question. They had a very good year last year in the regular season. They fell apart down the stretch and then just completely fell apart in the playoffs.
I love this team.
You and I not on the same page. I love this because last week we basically had the exact same order. Here's my question, then maybe you can answer this if you love this team.
I can't answer that.
Was last year's number 2 seed a fluke? Because the year before, they were the 3rd worst team in the NHL. This, to me, is the perfect example of a team that got helped by the 48-game schedule.
I can see why you say that.
Okay.
I think there is just a ton of young talent on this team.
That I do agree with. There is. There's no denying that.
So my question for this team, because I love the young talent on this team, is their maturation process next season. That's going to be the key to this team, is how they mature from last season. Take the success, whether the 48-game schedule it was an advantage for them or not an advantage for them. There's a lot of young talent on this team. This team is competitive. This team is hungry. I like this team. And I love their coach, and I think he can make them. If he's going to have 82 games over, he can deal with things. They don't have any BS going into the season. All that stuff is behind them. Remember all the BS going into last year?
With PK?
With PK.
Yeah.
No distractions.
You like their coach because he used to coach the Penguins? Is that where you're
I
going
like
with that?
him because I think he's a good coach.
Oh, that's a good reason, too. He is a good coach, and you're right. The young talent, I mean, it starts with PK Subban, who is only signed through this year. He's an RFA next summer. But Alex Galchenyuk was their reward for finishing so poorly back in 2012. They got him with the number 3 overall pick. How about Brendan Gallagher, who nobody really thought about coming into the season? And this is a guy that was right up there, potential Rookie of the Year candidate. 28 points when all was said and done, but he started off great.
And they bring a Quebec boy into the locker room too, and he's a solid veteran, and he is going to help that room. Whether he helps on the scoreboard or not, but he is going to help that bench. He is going to help that room. You know, he's a smaller player. People always said you're not going to make anything out of yourself. And Danny Briere is one of the premier players in the NHL. I don't care what anybody says. So him coming into that locker room with all these young players, there is no value that you can put on something like that.
I remember 24/7 a couple years ago when they showed I think it was the Flyers Rangers. Yeah. And even just in the limited time we had to see behind the scenes with that series, Danny Briere was so big with guys like Sean Couturier and Braden Shen and all those young guys coming in. I mean, some of them lived with him for a while until they kind of found their way in the league. That's a good point because Montreal does have young talent. I don't think they're going to be as good this year as they were last year, but down the line, they could be much better. And you're right, Danny Briere is a guy who could really be sort of the ringleader for that.
Yeah. My whole point with this team is they're young, they're competitive, they're hungry, great coach. And now I'll throw it a butt.
All right.
Because he's not consistent.
If you're talking about the same guy that I'm about to talk about, I don't understand why he's not, because he was the number 5 overall pick in the draft in 2005. Are we talking about Carey Price?
Correct.
Together?
Yeah.
Okay. 2.59 goals against average last year. I'm not a Canadiens fan. I imagine if I was, it would be maddening to watch him, not because he's bad, but because sometimes you see how good he can be.
Right. Well, you know who his lost brother is, right?
His lost brother?
Yeah.
Former NBA star Mark Price?
Oh, Andre Fleury.
That's not
all right.
nice. He's not that bad.
No, he's
a couple good games.
Well, you see, the reason I bring it up is, like, who's behind him?
Well, yeah. Is it still Peter Budaj?
Yeah.
It is Peter Budaj.
So, I mean, if you're a Montreal Canadian fan, and I'm not a Montreal Canadian fan, but I like this roster. I like this team. I think this team can do well. Maturation of the team is going to be big, but the Carey Price question is, like, because if he falls apart, I mean, if he collapses or implodes, you got nothing.
Then
got nothing.
Well, you have a very high lottery pick, is what you have. If he falls apart, that young talent's going to go with him, not permanently, but for this year. I mean, Brendan Gallagher and Alex Galchenyuk, potentially great players down the line, but they can't carry this team.
No.
So if Carey Price is falling apart, now look, PK Subban he won the Norris Trophy last season, so we can't just look past him.
Well, but he can't do it all himself either.
No, he can't. Carey Price's numbers 2 years ago, 2.43 goals against average, ironically, when they were one of the worst teams in the league. 2.35 the year before that, but 2.77 the season before that, and 2.83 in the 08-09 season. This past season, 2.59, which ironically, when they were very good, he was a little bit down. So, yeah, he's obviously going to be the difference maker. I mean, you have a goalie drafted that high, they really have to come through for you. You don't see goalies taken that high very often.
Okay, now obviously Carey Price played more games than Peter Budaj, but Peter Budaj had the better goals against average.
Which I find hard to believe because I watched Peter Budaj play a couple hockey games last year.
It's not pretty, is it?
It wasn't the best hockey I've ever seen.
Right.
So that's the Montreal Canadiens, the team that took them out in the playoffs last year. The Ottawa Senators, they'll be healthier in theory. You got Paul McLean back.
Mm-hmm.
One of the best coaches in hockey. You've got one of the best goaltenders when he's healthy in Craig Anderson.
Yeah, Anderson's awesome.
Probably the best young defenseman, at least offensively, in Erik Karlsson. He's got both of his Achilles tendons this year, which is always a positive.
Yeah. I can't even believe that he still came back last year.
Yeah, and you could tell he was frustrated because when you're that elite of an athlete and you can't skate at full speed.
Right.
You know,
which I thought was foolish for him to come back anyways. I would have just taken the season off and and healed 100%.
Somebody's got to step in there, right? Because obviously he's going to want to come back. I mean, he came back within like 2 months from a severed Achilles.
Yeah, well, we're all, even us beer leaguers, man, we don't want to sit.
It's true, but people don't have a bunch of money tied up in us.
The funny part here is I love this team. Paul McLean's got a bunch of guys scoring. There's not 3 guys scoring. But there's not anybody with more than 30 points.
Yeah, Ottawa's a good team. I mean, I know they lose Daniel Alfredsson, and you know that's going to hurt. But boy, I tell you what, they didn't even have Jason Spezza last year, so factor him back in. Kyle Turris led the team with 29 points. If Kyle Turris is going to be my leading point scorer, then I don't like my chances.
I don't think that's going to happen though, because Spezza's back.
Kyle
took the starting center because Spezza was out.
Spezza's back. Carlson's back. You lose Alfredsson, which we'll get to in a second. But then you had Bobby Ryan, who's probably the best goal scorer of all on that team.
Okay, so full disclosure, we live in Phoenix. I can't tell you.
Yeah, well,
how happy I would have been if I saw him come.
I think every team would have loved
to the
add
Western
Bobby
Conference.
Ryan.
Yeah.
But that's
a great.
NHL.
It's a huge pickup.
He would never have been traded to another team in the Western Conference.
I know exactly where I was. I was in the kitchen because the wife had me painting the kitchen.
It's not right. In the middle of free agency?
In the middle of free agency, I've got free agency going. I'm painting the kitchen, and then I hear about Alfredsson leaving. And I'm like...
Just a big red mark across your wall?
Like the paint is going across the cupboards and not on the wall.
That's dangerous to have somebody painting. That's such a permanent move. And when you have trades and moves flying around.
And then I went, I thought he was staying. He said he was staying. And I'm just... And my wife's in the room, and she goes, "What's wrong with you?" And I'm like, "Alfredsson's leaving Ottawa. He's not staying. He's going." And then they came right off the heels with that, and Ottawa's picked up Bobby Ryan. And I went, "Ah!"
And then your wife's like, "What's wrong with you?"
Yeah.
Can you imagine if you were an Ottawa fan painting your house when Daniel Alfredsson left?
That would have been ugly, dude.
Yeah, that would have been a whole lot of anger painted into the walls.
Yeah, so I was on a ladder facing the TV as I was
safe.
painting, and it was just... But yeah, Bobby Ryan, man, what a great pickup.
Well, here's my question then for Ottawa. We didn't even touch on all the good young defenders coming up behind Erik Karlsson. It's a good team. It's healthier. And they're probably going to be better statistically with Bobby Ryan. But who steps up as the leader? Because this is a team now that expects to make the playoffs and maybe overachieved a couple years ago and surprised some people. But now I think you expect them to make the playoffs, and when you get there, you want to win games. Who steps up?
2 names pop into my head.
All right. Now they're gone.
No. Okay. Jason Spezza.
It's a good answer.
And Erik Karlsson. I think those are your 2 leaders on this team.
Yeah, I can't argue that.
And so I think that's who Coach McLean will probably turn to.
Erik Karlsson just turned 23. And I'm fine with him being a leader. I mean, he already is a leader. You can't be that good of a player and not have to assume some sort of responsibility of leadership in the locker room. But you forget how young this guy is. You know, Spezza's been in the league for 10 plus years or whatever. And
he would be the obvious choice.
But it's amazing to me. You look at what Erik Karlsson has already accomplished. And I mean, he missed all of last season, but he still already has a bunch of... He's already got 163 points in the NHL, and he missed all of last year. So you think he would be older than 23, but he isn't. He just turned 23 in May.
Well, it's a young club, man. I mean, it's got a very young roster. They're all the median. Just glancing at the roster, the median age of this team can't be more than 24.
Yeah, they have to be one of the younger teams. Craig Anderson. I mean, look, their playoff run last year ended pretty badly against the Penguins. They didn't really look like they belonged in that series. But at the same time, they took out Montreal, and they picked up playoff experience last year.
Picked up playoff experience, and I had one note beside this team, and it was health.
Yeah. They're like the St. Louis of the East.
You know, I don't want a recurring injury for Jason Spezza or a recurring injury for Karlsson. I mean, just want these guys to be able to start, finish the season, and then there's no question.
They had terrible luck last year and still made the playoffs. Another guy they picked up last year, another young player, Corey Conacher, who they got from Tampa Bay. So we'll transition over to Tampa Bay here now. But Corey Conacher, a nice pickup for Ottawa.
I think that's a great pickup, yep.
Now, Tampa Bay is able to give him up because they have so much offense. They already had offense. They spent the offseason adding more offense. Valtteri Filppula. They go out and draft Jonathan Drouin. They already had Steven Stamkos. Now, they lose Vinny Lecavalier. So
what's your take on that?
What, the Stamkos thing or the
Lecavalier?
I mean, again, you're looking for a leader in the locker room.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you have Martin St. Louis. You have
Do you
kind
miss
of guys.
his points or just his leadership?
I don't think Tampa Bay misses players' points at this point. I mean, because you have Stamkos and
I don't
Louis.
disagree. I just wanted to see if we were on the same page.
I would say leadership. I mean, he's a very productive player, and he's not that old. So, yeah, you're going to miss – you lost a big player. You lost probably the face of your franchise up until Stamkos got there. But they went out and added all those guys, and you already have Stamkos and you already have St. Louis. My question with this team, there was so much talk going into the draft how they were taking Jonathan Drouin no matter what, and then they did. But Seth Jones was right there, and if ever a team needed to add defense, it's the Tampa Bay Lightning. Are they going to regret not taking him?
I don't know.
Okay, that's the answer I was
looking for. That's a good question. Yeah. I honestly don't have an answer. I mean, this team has always had firepower. I mentioned it earlier. If you score 8 goals, they'll score 10. You score 4 goals, they'll score 6. They just find a way. They win their games by outscoring you. So, blue line's a question. I mean, you got Eric Brewer, but
I don't think that's the answer.
No.
Nothing against Eric Brewer. You got Victor Hedman back there. I mean, look, my other question for Tampa that I ask every year, just why isn't this team better?
Because all they can do is score. They can't stop the puck. And I didn't look up their goals for and their goals against, but it's one thing to go in a game and say, I can score 8 goals and you can only score 6. But eventually that's going to wear down, man. I mean, you can't keep doing that. You've got to be able at one point in stopping the rubber from finding the back of the net. You have to. You've got to have a solid blue line for your transition, and so that you can score 6-0, 7-0, 5-0, 4-0, because you have the firepower to do that. And if you have a solid blue line that allows you to make that neutral zone transition and go back and keep putting the puck in their net, then you're going to have more success.
Well, I look at Tampa Bay, and you know, maybe Ben Bishop's the answer in goal. That's who they got for Corey Conacher in that trade with Ottawa. And I look at Steven Stamkos, who has now been in the league 5 years. Mm-hmm. His goal totals 23, 51, 45, 60, and then last year 29. But again, that's only 48 games. So for his career so far, 373 NHL games, 208 goals. That is ridiculous. 386 points, more than a point per game. Mm-hmm. You have a player like that, and you have Martin St. Louis, who everybody forgets about, but he won the Art Ross Trophy again last season.
Right.
They had Vinny Lecavalier all those years, and those weren't the only 3 guys scoring. This team has made the playoffs once in the last 6 years. How does that happen?
I don't know, and then it gets worse because you've got a coach, John Cooper, who has no NHL experience, but he has a lot of minor league experience. Okay, so he starts his career as a coach in the NAHL. He finishes with a .734 and an .828 win percentage in that league. Then he moves over to the USHL.
Okay.
And he finishes with a .683 and a .792 win percentage and makes the playoffs. Loses in the second round of his first year and wins the championship in his second year. Okay, here's a guy his win percentages are high. He takes over the Admirals in the AHL. He's in the playoffs the first year. He wins the championship the second year. His last year as an AHL coach was with the Crunch, and he loses in the finals.
It sounds like cereal.
Yes, it does sound like cereal.
Yeah, that was, yeah.
But he lost in the finals. So as a head coach at the AHL level, makes the playoffs, wins the championships, loses in the finals. So he's in the finals 2 years in a row. The question is he going to be able to step on an NHL bench and take that success from the minor leagues and put it in the NHL? Because on paper, as a coach, his numbers, his record, phenomenal. But can he get those NHL players to perform?
Well, and if you're going to lose, I hear everything you're saying, and his key obviously is going to be fixing defense or goaltending or whatever he has to do. If you're going to lose a guy like Vinny Lecavalier, I understand that. I mean, that was just the way it had to be this year. It's not like but it would be nice if you lose a guy like that, if you're getting a stud defenseman back or something. And I know
Right.
he had nothing to show for it when all was said and done. Jonathan Drouin could end up being a truly special player. I just don't know that Tampa needed him so much. And again, there was no question they were taking him. I mean, they basically said that the second they got a top pick that they were going to take Drouin. So I don't know. And you can only project so much for a guy like him or a guy like Seth Jones, but it just seems like they needed Seth Jones. And without Vinny Lecavalier, I mean, this is going to be like when Brandon left Beverly Hills 90210. I mean, it's just, I don't know if it's just not the same team.
I can gladly say I never ever watched an episode of that show.
You can hide. Whatever. I see right through you. You never watched one today, is what you're saying.
No, I never watched an episode ever.
It's like when Charlie Sheen left 2.5 Men. Is that better for you? Is that easier?
No, because that was bad. That was really bad.
Tampa might be bad.
Although Ashton Kutcher made a pretty good.
I can
replace the show is pretty good.
Ashton Kutcher is the Jonathan Drouin of the Tampa Bay Lightning, but I can safely say I haven't watched that show. Toronto, last team. This is all for you, Doug.
It's all for me.
I'll start you off with a nice question. Can they finish games in the 2013-14 season? Because the way they went out last year in the playoffs still has to sting. And it has to sting for every team that Boston took out after that.
I think that's more of a team that hasn't been there.
So does it help them?
I think making the playoffs last year definitely helped them. Absolutely. They have a few big question marks because you don't know unless you're there, okay? And let's face it, Toronto hasn't had a lot of success. I mean, for a starred franchise in the league and in the world of hockey, I mean, they've done absolutely nothing.
Certainly in the last generation. I mean, they hadn't made the playoffs until this past season.
It was 03-04, I think, was their last.
2 work stoppages since they made the playoffs.
We hadn't even sniffed it.
Yeah.
So I think last year was huge for them because they needed it. They needed to sniff it. They needed to be in there.
And looked good when they were there. Easily could have won.
I mean, you think of that last game, that was a mental breakdown. I mean, it happens at all levels of hockey. I see it all the time. If you don't get the puck out of your zone, something bad's going to happen. And you have to understand your game situation and where you are in the game and what your priority is. It's not about being fancy and deking and stuff. When you're winning a game and the clock is ticking, get it out of your zone.
Yeah, and that's where I think people get confused. It's you either go with the team that goes out and just tries to keep scoring and they get burned because they're not playing enough defense, or you get the team that just sits back on their heels, which some of the parts of that game against Boston, of course, Game 7 last year when they had the 4-1 lead with about 8 minutes left and ended up losing in overtime, I think they almost sat back too much and let Boston just continue to take chances. And look, it was a great comeback. Make no mistake about it, there was some luck in there for Boston, too. I mean, this is hockey. To score 2 goals in the final few seconds against Toronto, and you have to get some luck, too. But once you got to overtime, there was no way Boston wasn't winning that game, and that's, I think, the mental toughness for a young team you're talking about.
I like the fact that ownership extended Nonis. I think that was a good move. I think he's going to be a good GM for this club. The bigger question, I think, for a lot of Toronto fans is you re-sign Tyler Bozak, who had a good playoff. Can't take it away from him. And you sign David Clarkson. But where's Cody Franzen?
Yeah, he gave Clarkson a lot of money.
Where's Nazem Kadri?
Well, here's the biggest question with this team right off the bat. Phil Kessel's a free agent next summer.
Mm-hmm. Phaneuf.
I mean, Dave Bolin, Nikolai Kulemin as well, but the big ones are Phaneuf and Kessel. But as you just said, Cody Franzen is still a restricted free agent right now, and so is Kadri. And they don't have a whole lot of room. So they can probably re-sign Kadri. I think they have like $4.6 million left under the cap for this year. He's going to want pretty close to that.
Again, we're going to go back because the other question is like, how do you Kadri up front you need. He's young. He's aggressive. He can score. He can move the puck around. He can help Phil Kessel. He can do that, okay? Bozak as a center is just a hard-nosed center. But that blue line, you can't not have a Franzen if Phaneuf's not coming back.
Yeah, they have to keep one of them.
I mean, how do you not have those guys buttoned up, because your other big question with this team is your goaltending. Are you going to be the Vancouver of the East going into the season and not have a solid number one?
Well, the defense will help that. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's the true question with this team, and we've tiptoed around that. But let's just quickly on the defense again. If you don't re-sign Cody Franzen, and then next year you say we have to keep Kessel too, so then you lose Phaneuf, then at that point your defense is John Michael Lyles, Carl Gunnarsson, Corbinian Holzer. That's your defense. I mean, you can't lose all these pieces on defense.
And you and I talk about it all the time. You know, you start with the goaltending, your blue line, and then your offense, right? You work up the middle. You get your centers established, and then you develop, you fan out to your wings. But who's number one? I thought, and I was very happy as a Toronto Maple Leaf fan, because that's where I was born. It's my city, that Bernier was a great pickup.
He is, but you got to handle it right.
Then that's where we sit, right? It's where we're sitting.
Well,
because
yeah.
if I'm James Reimer, I'm like, it's my job.
Well, he basically said that when they went out and got Bernier.
But Bernier, he's sitting in L.A. as a backup and performing at a high level, and he's coming in here. And if I'm him, I'm like, I got every chance to take that away.
James Reimer was very solid last year. I mean, again, Toronto hadn't made the playoffs in forever, but he put together a .924 save percentage, 19-8-5 record, 2.46 goals against average, was solid at times, at least in the playoffs. I mean, he's still a young guy as well. So, yeah, I think that he probably thought at the end of last season, you know what? I know there was questions about goal. I've answered them. This is my team. And then Toronto goes out and gets Bernier, which is great if they push each other. It's horrible if they implode, like you said, if they end up being Vancouver and they don't know what they're doing back there. Mm-hmm. Jonathan Bernier, do you like this move? I mean, you were in L.A. By all accounts, he's a good enough goalie to be a number one somewhere, but he couldn't get in front of Jonathan Quick. Now he's behind James Reimer for now.
I like Bernier.
You think he's going to be the starter?
I think so.
Who is the starter when we come back from the Olympic break this year? Bernier?
Bernier.
Okay.
I fully believe that.
But Reimer has to start opening
and
night.
I think Nonis has been around long enough that he's not going to let a Vancouver situation happen in Toronto.
So then what happens to Reimer? Backup or traded?
Well, eventually, maybe.
Okay.
But I think he's backup.
We finally get
I think that's your 1-2, but your number one is going to be Bernier.
Do we finally get the trade I keep lobbying for, where they trade Reimer to Edmonton for a young forward?
Could happen.
It'd be a great trade for both teams, so it'll probably never happen. All right.
True.
Predictions?
Standings.
Am I going first?
Okay, number one, who do you have?
Detroit.
I have Ottawa.
Oh, bold. I like it. Okay, number two.
Okay, wait a minute. So you picked Detroit. Yeah. I have Ottawa. Okay, number two.
Boston.
You have Boston. I have Boston.
Okay.
3.
Ottawa.
I have Montreal.
Oh, wow. Oh, no love for Detroit. So by our predictions, those are the 3 playoff teams that are guaranteed spots.
Right.
Remember the new
format. I have
make it.
Ottawa, Boston, Montreal. You have Detroit, Boston, Ottawa.
And then these other teams, the next 2 could still make it as wild cards.
Correct.
Okay.
So who do you have at 4?
Toronto at 4.
You have Toronto at 4. I have Detroit at 4.
Okay.
Who do you have at 5?
I have Tampa. I think Tampa pulls it together a little bit this year, finally.
I have Toronto at 5.
Now, I will openly admit Tampa Bay could finish last in the entire league, so that's a bit of a stretch for me, but I'm going to go with them.
And then 6, you have
Montreal.
Montreal. Wow, you shoved them way down.
No, number 2 in the conference last year.
Oh, that's a big drop. I have Tampa at 6.
Okay. Number 7, I think we probably both have Buffalo.
And Buffalo at 7 and Florida at 8.
Boy, Florida a distant 8. Like, there's space between Buffalo and Florida.
Florida's only at 8 because they just have a lot of work. It's not gonna turn around in a season, and it's just the situation they're in.
Florida's only at 8 because there's not 9 teams in the division.
You're listening to The Hockey Podcast. Feel free to email comments or questions to the show at our email address, thehockeypodcast@gmail.com.
Final segment here, news and notes. Touch on the Swedish Olympic roster here in just a second, because we continue to preview the Olympics, which are just 6 short months away, Doug.
That's unbelievable.
But the preseason schedule, I don't know if we just took a closer look at it or what, but it's interesting to note that a lot of these games this season, and preseason starts in basically a month, are going to be played outside of NHL cities.
Yeah, I thought it was cool.
I think it's a good idea.
And the very first one is between Washington and Winnipeg, and it will be played at Belleville, Ontario at Yardman Arena. Now, the background on this is a community called Sterling Rawdon, Ontario, was the winner of the Canada-wide Craft Hockeyville competition. So their town gets an NHL game, but I guess
That's cool.
I guess the closest arena was in Belleville, close to that small community. But that's way cool for a small community to get an NHL club coming in. They're going to play in some smaller barn for locals to come. I think that's way cool.
And why not? I mean, it's preseason hockey. This is a chance for your young players to prove themselves and guys to try and get on the roster, but it's also a chance for the league to kind of showcase itself in different cities. And look at some of the cities they're going to be playing in: London, Ontario. We got Saskatoon, Baltimore, Maryland for the Capitals Bruins game on September 17th. Orlando, Florida.
Regina, Saskatchewan.
Yeah. So San Antonio, Texas for Dallas and Florida. And
Quebec City. Quebec fans and citizens are all excited.
See there, they got
going to
their
be at the Colisée, Pepsi.
That's what they wanted, right? That's what they were
what they
clamoring
wanted.
for.
They got
one NHL preseason game.
Dallas is going to play at the AT&T Center.
That's a cool setup. I mean, because you have Dallas, who's not that far from San Antonio, and then you have Florida, whose AHL team is the Rampage. So it's cool that they're doing this. And really, the best thing is I'm looking through the schedule, and I just see a lot of hockey teams getting ready to play hockey.
Well, the great thing too, but I like the little things like Jersey taking on the Islanders at Barclays Center in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
I think that's way cool.
It's every night, too. You go through the preseason schedule, every night there's one game that's not where they normally are.
Where's Estero, Florida?
It's in Florida.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. It sounds like it's in the eastern.
How about Oklahoma City?
Well, that's a cool one, too, because, again, Dallas is relatively near there, and Edmonton's AHL team is there.
Okay, so now, here we go. Colorado, Los Angeles, Las Vegas.
Well, that's the one, obviously. And that's September 28th, the night before Rangers-Kings in Las Vegas. So 2 games for the Kings in the MGM. Right? They're playing in the MGM?
MGM Grand is listed,
Where do they fit these things in the MGM? I've been to the MGM before, and then there's just a whole other – there's arena in the background?
I don't know. I don't know if the bowl, the concert venue, can put in ice or not.
I don't even know where that is.
Oh, okay. Where all the boxing and concerts are, that one hall that's on the MGM Grand. That's the only place I can think of, and it's steep seating. So you'll be on top of the ice if that's where they're going to build the ice.
How ridiculous is Las Vegas? I mean, everything is so big that, oh, yeah, we just have an ice arena in the back there by the slot machines.
And they're building a new one.
That'd be a cool game. L.A., Colorado, or L.A. and the Rangers. So if you got nothing to do in late September,
Barrie, Ontario gets a game
for
too.
A reason to go to Las Vegas.
So preseason starts 9/14, and it ends on September 29th.
And then we get NHL
and then regular season October 1st.
Again, just therapeutically, it is August 11th as we record this.
Mm-hmm.
If we can just get to early September, we've got rookie camp, training camp, preseason, then the NHL starts in October. So we can get through September. It's just these next 3 weeks that are the toughest.
It's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough.
But we're going to fight our way through it by previewing Sweden's national team at the Olympics.
It's a good team, man.
It is. You know, we went through Canada and the U.S. a couple weeks ago. Went through Russia last week, and I don't know that we're going to do a whole lot more than this one, maybe Finland, but certainly Sweden rounds out the 4 teams that are the most likely to win the gold medal.
Correct.
And really, it's remarkable that these 4 teams, one of them isn't even going to medal that we've gone through.
Right.
That's insane.
So we'll start with the goalies. Victor Fath.
It's Faust.
Okay.
Think of yourself as Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I did that on purpose.
But think of yourself as Arnold when you say the name.
Faust.
See, there you go. Henrik Lundqvist will be starting.
He's got to be the starting goalie.
Yeah.
The battle's going to be Enroth from Buffalo, Faust from Anaheim. And I don't know if Lerner's in there. I don't know if he's in the mix.
I don't know. I don't know why I keep getting a survey popping up to ask me who's going to lead the Minnesota Wild in scoring in 2013-14 every time I look at Sweden's roster. How many times can I vote for Zach Parise over and over again here? Defense, Sweden is just sneaky good. They really are.
Why? Because you have guys like Johnny Oduya and Erik Karlsson.
Oliver Ekman-Larsson.
Oliver Ekman-Larsson. I mean, can we get any better?
Nicholas Kronwall. So now you have a sort of like the hammer back there, Nicholas Kronwall. Then you've got these skill guys like Carlson, Ekman Larson. You got Oduya, who's had a lot of great NHL experience.
But, I mean, let's look at OEL. I mean, he's going to put the puck in the net, and he's going to hold that blue line.
So is Carlson.
I mean, geez Louise. I mean, yeah, their blue line's phenomenal.
And we didn't even say anything about Victor Hedman.
Right.
Alex Edler, who I'm assuming will make the team, but I believe is suspended for a couple games at the start of the Olympics if he does play. So I don't know if that's going to affect him making it or not. But that's their defense, and that might not even be their strong point.
Oh, it's like got these two guys called Sedin up front.
Yeah, and this is the venue where they actually win meaningful games, is in the Olympics and international competition.
Another guy named Backstrom.
Henrik Zetterberg.
I mean, they got a lot of great players on this team.
Gabriel Landeskog.
Yeah, Landeskog.
Louis Eriksson. Not the sort of team that I would want to be stitching the names on the back of the jerseys for.
And a team you don't want to take lightly.
No, because they have all this talent, and they always seem to come together very well.
Yeah, they do play well together when they get together.
Because that's the Olympics, right? And it's just a matter of which team can bring all their talent together the quickest.
Right.
And Sweden always seems to do it.
And then we'll wrap the show up with a final look, not a final look, but another look at free agency before the season. Not free agency, but free agents before the season begins.
Still some decent names out there.
Just look at some of these names, and I'm like, but the big one that's going to pop out today is Nick Antropov, because we mentioned him last week, and now he's decided to go across the pond to Russia.
Yeah, Winnipeg's had this problem in the offseason. I mean, Antropov leaves, and, I don't know. If you had a Jets fan here, I don't know how necessarily sad they are to see him go, because he wasn't great last year, but that's a guy who can put the puck in the net. Mm-hmm. We talked about it last week in the Central Division preview, though. Alex Burmistrov was supposed to be one of their next bright young scorers, and he goes back to the KHL. They lost a couple other guys that aren't as big to the KHL this summer. I mean, they're really the only team losing guys across the ocean.
And then I look at the top names here, and it's
the
names I have in front of me are ranked
in New Jersey
as cap hits, okay?
Okay.
So it's going to be the most expensive to the least expensive. But the key thing, too, that I'm looking here is that they're older players, they're veteran players, hence the heavy salaries. But one of the guys at the very top is only 29, and Mikhail Grabowski.
I don't understand why he's still out there. I guess I don't understand why he hasn't gone to the KHL. But you have to think, and there's been rumors that there are 3 teams that are very close to signing him. Those rumors have been out there for 3 weeks, though, now. So
he's a talented player.
And you know what? He came, I don't know if it was him specifically that came out and said, but somebody close to him said, we can only tell you Winnipeg isn't one of the teams. Like, I don't understand
they just lost Antropov.
Yeah. I mean, he could slide right in there and be,
he could be a big dog or, as I said, a big fish in a small pond. I mean, he could do really well with Winnipeg.
So there's
20, if they have the money.
Yeah. So there's 29 teams in the running for Mikhail Grabowski. That's what we can tell you right now. And apparently 3 of them are close. But he would be a good fit. And like you said, he's the only guy under 30 that's near the top of this list. I mean, the other guys are the usual suspects of Ilya Bryzgalov. We don't know if he's going to end up on an NHL roster. Tim Thomas, you got to think he's going to get a pretty decent chance.
Yeah.
Teemu Selanne, if he comes back, he's probably going to Anaheim. But Grabowski is the one that stands out more than anybody.
He's the big one that stands out. And the other one I keep, he's 34, but, I mean, that's not ancient anymore.
It's true.
When guys are playing 41, 40 years of age, is Danny Cleary.
Yeah, that's not even who I thought you were going to say, but yeah, Cleary, I don't know if he's waiting to see if Detroit can open up room for him, if he's just going to end up in Dallas. He's going to end up somewhere. We agree Daniel Cleary's going to be on a team.
He has to be, man. He's too solid a veteran not to have.
But how about the other guy who's also 34, Brendan Morrow?
Yeah.
I mean, that guy can still play hockey.
Right.
And it's so weird. He spent his whole career on Dallas. It was weird to see him in Pittsburgh last year, and now he's going to be on a 3rd team.
And right now, it doesn't have a team.
Yeah, that's a little odd, too. So, that's free agency. Mikhail Grabowski, maybe everybody heard his exit speech directed towards Randy Carlyle and pretty much anybody that was in his way. Maybe,
doesn't help.
Maybe that's why he's not on the team yet. That is it for episode 16. Next week, we'll stick with the Eastern Conference and continue our division-by-division preview of the 2013-14 season with a look at the always popular Metro Division.
That's right, THP fans. Not only will we take a look at that silly Metro name and division, we will also wrap up our look at another Olympic roster.
Plus, whatever else happens in the next 7 days, we'll be there. Thanks for listening to the Hockey Podcast.